For 8 long years the Apache had wandered alone, his life reduced to silence, shadow, and the endless rhythm of survival. His name, once spoken with respect among his people, had long since faded into whispers the desert wind carried away. In the stillness of his exile, he became more spirit than man, shaped by the wild lands he called his only companion. The canyons knew his footsteps, the rivers knew his thirst, and the mountains bore witness to the battles he fought not with other warriors, but with loneliness itself. Each morning began before the sun crept above the red horizon. The Apache woke with instinct sharpened like the knife he kept close at hand. Hunger was his first thought, not dreams, not memories of family, not the warmth of a woman's touch. Those belonged to a world he had left behind. He hunted with patience, sometimes trailing deer for hours, sometimes snaring rabbits, sometimes chewing roots when the land offered nothing else. Food was not pleasure, it was necessity. Fire became his closest ally. By its light he mended arrows, carved tools, and warded off the creeping cold of desert nights. But he rarely kept his flames. Alive for long smoke was a signal, and signals brought men. And men, he had learned, meant danger. The solitude was not chosen. It was thrust upon him. 8 years earlier, betrayal had broken the fragile bonds that tied him to his people. Blood had been spilled, some his enemies, some his kins. He carried guilt like a stone in his chest, too heavy to put down, too sharp to ignore. To remain among his tribe would have meant death by vengeance or death by shame. So he chose the wilderness where only the spirits could judge him. Yet even spirits seemed distant. At night, when the stars burned fiercely in the black sky, he sometimes whispered old songs his mother had sung to him as a child. The words trembled from his throat, strange and cracked, as though they no longer belonged to him. He remembered the faces of his kin, his father, stern and proud, his brothers laughing as they raced their ponies, and women whose eyes had once followed him with curiosity. Those memories flickered like firelight, but he forced them away. A man who lived in memory risked dying in the present. Women were the chalvanfins of Amen, where the memory, where the Kenfenju lived in memory, risked dying in the present. Hardest memory to silence. He had not touched one in all these years, nor even spoken to one closely. There had been moments when, in villages he skirted on his travels, he glimpsed them from afar, hair shining in the sun, laughter ringing like bells. But he kept to the shadows. His life had no room for such softness. Desire was dangerous. Attachment was deadly. The Apache knew that once you reached for what you longed for, you made yourself weak. And weakness was a luxury he could not afford. Instead, he poured himself into the land. He became part of it, moving like a fox through thickets, silent as the hawk circling above. He knew the taste of different waters, the sound of approaching storms, the language of animal tracks. His body, scarred and lean, was an instrument of endurance. Pain meant little, hunger even less. Solitude became his armor, but solitude also gnawed at him, slow as rot in wood. There were nights when the silence pressed too hard against his ears, and he longed for the sound of another voice. Sometimes he spoke aloud, answering questions no one had asked, just to hear something human. Other times he would sit before a dying fire and imagine what it might be like to share it, to look across the flames into another's eyes. He imagined, then cursed himself for weakness, and turned his thoughts back to survival. Seasons passed and blurred together. Winters were cruel, summers merciless. Yet he endured them all. The Apache was nothing if not stubborn, and stubbornness kept him alive. The years hardened him, carving away gentleness, shaping him into something more feral, less bound to the town, to the world of men. And yet, beneath all that stone and scar, a part of him still waited, a part he did not dare acknowledge. He told himself it was gone, the hunger for touch, for belonging, for connection, but deep within, that hunger smoldered. Like coals under ash. 8 years had passed this way. 8 years of silence, hunger, ghosts, and endless wandering. He believed his life would end as it had been lived in solitude. He believed no force in the world could break the armor he had forged. But the world had other plans. And soon, in the deep woods, he would stumble upon something he had not expected, something that would pierce through his solitude, like an arrow through the heart. A girl tied to a tree. The Apache's exile had not begun with silence. It had begun with fire, blood, and the cries of the dying. His past lingered like smoke in his lungs, a memory he could never quite expel. No matter how far he rode or how long he wandered, he had once been a warrior of promise, swift on horseback, steady with bow and rifle. His people trusted him, admired his courage, and some even looked to him as a leader in the making. But pride, as it often does, became his downfall. Pride and the sharp blade of betrayal. It was during a raid, years ago, when everything had unraveled. The Apache had led his band of fighters against enemies who had stolen horses and mocked his people's honor. The raid should have been swift strike under the cover of night, reclaim what was stolen, and return before the sun rose. But something went wrong. Their enemy had been waiting. The camp was a trap. Arrows rained from hidden ridges, rifles cracked from the shadows, and men he had trusted fell screaming around him. He fought like a cornered wolf, tearing his way through the ambush, killing without thought, guided only by instinct. When the smoke cleared, half his band lay dead. Among them was his own brother, struck down by a bullet that had not been meant for him. The Apache carried his brother's lifeless body from the battlefield, his heart hollowed by grief. But grief was not the only wound. Whispers began among the survivors. He led us into a trap. He was too proud. He did not see the signs. Some claimed. He had even been betrayed by one of his own, though no one could agree who. The suspicion poisoned everything. In the days that followed, vengeance took root. His brother's widow spat at his feet. His father's eyes, once proud, burned with quiet fury, and when another of the fallen's kin challenged him openly, the Apache's temper snapped. Steel flashed, blood spilled, and another man lay dying at his feet. That moment sealed his fate. Exile was not declared with ceremony. It was forced by the weight of dishonor. To stay was to bring more blood upon his people. To leave was the only path that remained. And so he had gone, riding into the wilderness with nothing but his weapons, his horse, and a heart carved hollow by rage and guilt. The years that followed did nothing to soften those wounds. He replayed that night in his mind endlessly, seeking signs he had missed, words he should have spoken, choices he could have made. Each memory was a knife twisting deeper. His brother's face haunted him most of all, the way the light had left his eyes, the warmth fading from his skin. Sometimes he dreamed of him, standing among the stars, silent and accusing, and beneath the grief lay anger. Anger at the enemies who had set the trap, anger at the traitor, if indeed there had been one who had whispered secrets, and anger at himself most of all. A warrior's pride should not blind him. A brother's duty should not fail. Yet both had, and the price was exile. The Apache bore scars from that night, not all of them visible. A jagged line across his ribs from a rifle ball, a notch in his ear from an arrow's graze, but the deepest scars were inside. That was why he had turned away from his people, from laughter, from warmth. He feared that if he returned, death would follow. He feared that his presence alone carried a curse. So he chose solitude, believing it a kind of penance. Each day of hunger, each night of cold, each year without a woman's touch, these were his atonement. To deny himself was to honor those who had died in his place. That was the story he told himself, though it did little to ease the emptiness gnawing at him. Still, even as he carried the weight of his haunted past, a flicker of something stubborn remained. He had not let himself die. He had not walked willingly into the path of a rifle. Some part of him, small, buried, and unacknowledged still, clung to life, as if waiting for a chance at redemption. He did not know what form that redemption might take. He did not know if it would ever come. But the wilderness had not claimed him, nor had despair. His haunted past had shaped him, but it had not destroyed him. Not yet. And soon, fate would test whether that resilience was strength or simply another path to ruin. For in the shadows of the forest, chained by cruelty and chance, the girl in the tree waited. And with her arrival, the past he had spent 8 years outrunning would rise again. The forest was unusually still that morning. The Apache felt it first in his bones, long before his senses confirmed it. Birds should have been calling overhead, and the chatter of squirrels should have carried through the trees. Instead, silence hung like a shroud. He slowed his steps, every muscle tense, his eyes sweeping the undergrowth for signs of movement. The stillness of nature was never empty. It always meant something. He was following deer tracks along a narrow trail, the earth soft with recent rain. The prints were fresh, the edges sharp. His hunger gnawed at him, urging him to continue, but something stronger than hunger tugged at his instincts, caution. He gripped his bow a little tighter and moved forward like a shadow sliding through the trees. Then came the sound. At first, he thought it was the wind moaning through the branches, faint and broken. But as he stilled and listened closer, he realized it was no wind, it was a voice. A woman's voice, low and ragged, barely more than a whisper, carried on the air. His heart jolted, his breath catching in his chest. It had been so many years since he had heard such a sound. For a moment, he thought it might be his mind playing tricks, the wilderness toying with his loneliness. But then it came again. Weak, desperate, human. Moving silently, he left the deer trail behind, letting the sound guide him deeper into the woods. He advanced carefully, circling, watching for signs of ambush. It would not be the first time enemies had used suffering as bait. Every rustle of leaves, every shadow between the trees, he studied with the sharpness of a hunter. And then he saw her. At first, she looked almost like part of the tree itself, slumped, unmoving, her body bound tight with ropes that cut into her wrists. Her hair hung in tangled strands, her face pale beneath the grime. She was tied to the trunk as though she were some offering to the spirits. Abandoned to die beneath the canopy. The Apache froze, his breath shallow. A storm of feelings crashed through him, weariness, confusion, and something else he hadn't felt in years, a stir of raw, protective anger. He crouched, scanning the ground for tracks. There were many. Boot prints, not moccasins, heavy, careless steps. Men had been here, and recently. Their trail led away from the tree, vanishing into the forest's shadows. Whoever they were, they had not left her by accident. His eyes returned to her. She stirred faintly, lifting her head. For an instant, her gaze locked onto his. Even in her weakness, there was fire in her eyes' defiance, as though she dared the world to see her suffering and tremble. That look pierced him deeper than any arrow. The Apache's first instinct was to turn away. This was not his fight. The wilderness had taught him not to take on burdens that were not his own. She would slow him, weaken him, and bring the hunters who had left her there straight to his trail. He owed her nothing, but as he turned, he felt the weight of his brother's memory pressing against him. The memory of leaving men behind, of failing those who had trusted him. His jaw tightened. No, he would not let another die when he had the power to prevent it. Not again. Moving swiftly, he drew his knife and crossed to her side. Her breath quickened as he approached, and for a moment he saw fear in her eyes. Fear. Of him, he understood it. To her he was a stranger, a wild man of the forest with hard eyes and a knife in hand. "I will not harm you," he said, his voice rough from disuse. The words felt strange on his tongue, the first he had spoken to another soul in what felt like an eternity. The ropes were thick, knotted cruelly. With quick, efficient cuts, he freed her wrists and ankles. She collapsed forward, too weak to stand. He caught her before she struck the ground, her weight startling him not for its heaviness, but for the unfamiliar warmth of another body against his doubt for a heartbeat. He froze. The smell of her hair, the softness of her skin, it stirred. Something in him he thought long buried. He clenched his jaw, pushing the feeling aside, and steadied her carefully. "You are safe," he said, though even as the words left him, he knew they were a lie. She was not safe. Not here, not now. The men who had left her bound to the tree would return, and when they did, they would find more than they bargained for. The Apache lifted her into his arms and turned into the forest. For 8 years, solitude had been his shield. But with this girl, his path had changed. He felt it as surely as the beat of her faint pulse against his chest. Fate had found him again. Her weight in his arms was light, too light, like a bird starved of seed and sky. The Apache carried her carefully, his steps silent despite the urgency in his chest. He did not yet know who she was, nor why she had been bound. But one truth pressed against him as sharply as the knife at his hip. If he left her here, she would die. The forest around them seemed to thicken as he moved, the air heavy with the scent of damp earth and pine. Every snapping twig, every whisper of wind made his ears twitch. He did not hurry, for haste left trails, and trails drew hunters. Instead, he moved with the patience of a wolf, carrying her deeper into the woods until he reached a place he knew. Well, a hollow between rocks, hidden beneath overhanging branches. A place he had used before when he needed to vanish. He set her down gently on a bed of moss and leaves. She stirred, her lips parting, but only a rasp of sound escaped. Her throat was dry, cracked from thirst. Without a word, he took a small pouch from his side, poured water into his hand, and pressed it to her lips. She drank greedily at first, then coughed, and he drew his hand back. Too much at once could kill as surely as none at all. "You must take it slow," he said. His voice was low, calm, though inside him something trembled. It had been years since he had spoken more than a handful of words at a time. Hearing his own voice now felt almost foreign, like listening to a ghost. Her eyes opened wider, clearer, now studying him. Fear lingered in their depths, but alongside it burned something fiercer, determination. She was not broken. Whoever had tied her to that tree had failed to crush her spirit. Why? "Help me?" she whispered, her voice cracked like brittle bark. He did not answer immediately. Instead, he took a strip of dried meat from his pouch, softened it with water, and placed it near her hand. She looked at it, then at him, suspicion shadowing her gaze. "I have seen too much death," he said at last, the words heavy with the weight of his past. "I will not leave another to it." For a long moment she said nothing. Then, slowly, she reached for the food. Her fingers trembled as she tore off a piece and chewed. It was hard, dry, but it gave her strength. The Apache watched her carefully. Every small motion told him something. The way her wrists bled from the ropes, the bruises along her arms, the dirt ground into her skin. She had been held captive for some time. Yet she bore it with a warrior's quiet dignity. When she had eaten enough to steady herself, he set about tending to her wounds. He tore strips from his own shirt, binding her wrists where the ropes had cut deep. She flinched when his hands brushed her skin, but did not pull away. His touch was firm but careful, the touch of a man used to mending injuries in the wild. Where mistakes meant infection and infection meant death doubt as he worked, he felt her eyes on him. Not with gratitude, not yet, but with wary curiosity. She was measuring him, trying to decide if he was savior or captor. He understood. Trust was not given easily, nor should it be. Rest, he told her when the bandages were tied. Strength will return. She gave a small, bitter laugh. If they do not find me first. His head snapped toward her. Who? Her eyes darkened. The men who left me. They will not stop. He had suspected as much, but hearing it from her lips sent a chill down his spine. He scanned the forest beyond their hollow, his instincts sharpening. She was right. If she had been left tied as bait or punishment, her tormentors would return to see their work finished. The Apache tightened the grip on his knife. For 8 years he had avoided men, avoided fights that were not his own. But now, with this woman weak and hunted at his side, he felt the old fire rising in his blood. He had saved her from the tree, but rescue was not finished. Not yet. He looked back at her, his expression unreadable. Then let them come. She studied him, and for the first time since he had found her, something shifted in her gaze. A flicker of trust. A recognition that this man, this wild, silent warrior, might stand between her and death. The Apache settled into silence, listening to the forest, every sense alive. The rescue had begun, but the storm was still ahead. The girl slept fitfully, curled against the moss and stone, her breath shallow but steady. The Apache sat nearby, back straight, eyes fixed on the darkness beyond the hollow. He had not closed his eyes since finding her. Sleep was a luxury he could not afford now, not with the knowledge that men might already be circling back to claim what they had left tied to the tree. When dawn finally bled across the treetops, painting the sky with pale fire, she stirred. Her eyes opened slowly, wariness sharpening her features as if waking meant stepping into battle. For a moment she seemed not to remember where she was. Then her gaze found him sitting a few paces away, knife in hand, watching the forest as though it whispered secrets only he could hear. She pushed herself up on trembling arms. "Why are you still here?" she asked, her voice stronger than it had been the night before. His eyes flicked toward her, unreadable. "You cannot yet walk far. If I leave, you die." The bluntness of his words made her frown. She wrapped her arms around herself, shivering despite the warmth of the morning sun. "So I am your burden now?" The Apache did not answer right. Away. He tightened a leather thong of his knife sheath, considering. Words did not come easily to him. Silence had been his companion for too long. Finally he said, "You are alive. That is all that matters." She looked away, frustration shadowing her features. It was clear she was not used to relying on others. Her pride fought against the weakness of her body, against the need to accept help from a stranger, especially a stranger like him, hard-eyed, scarred, carrying the aura of a man who belonged more to the wilderness than to people. For the rest of the morning, their companionship was strained. He hunted small game with his bow, moving swift and silent. She tried to rise and follow him, but collapsed after a few steps, her body too battered to obey her will. When he returned with a rabbit, she refused the first offering of roasted meat until her hunger betrayed her, and she ate in silence, eyes cast down. "Your name," he said at last, breaking the long quiet. She hesitated. "Elena," she murmured, as if unsure whether she should trust him with even that. "Elena," he repeated, testing the shape of the word on his tongue. It had been years since another person's name passed his lips. Something about saying it, acknowledging her as more than a shadow he had pulled from death settled deep within him. "And you?" she asked, almost reluctantly. He shook his head. "Names have no place in exile." That answer unsettled her. She stared at him as if trying to peel back layers of stone with her eyes. But he offered no more dot. As the day stretched on, they moved carefully through the forest. He supported her when she stumbled, his hand firm around her arm. Each time, she pulled away as soon as she found her footing, unwilling to appear weak. Her pride sparked against his stoic silence, their every interaction edged with unspoken tension. By evening, they had covered only a short distance. He led her to another hidden hollow where a stream trickled through smooth stones. She knelt at the water, cupping her hands, and for a brief moment her face softened. He watched her silently, noting the contrast between her fragility and her fire. She was no helpless captive, her spirit burned too brightly for that. Still, mistrust lingered between them like a third presence. When the fire crackled low and shadows stretched across their shelter, she finally spoke what had been pressing on her heart. "You could have left me," she said quietly. "You should have. Those men will come, and when they do, they will kill you too." He met her gaze steadily. "Let them try." For the first time, her lips curved into the faintest hint of a smile, wry, disbelieving, but not unkind. "You are a stubborn fool." "Perhaps," he said simply. They fell into silence again, but this time it was different. Less heavy, less hostile. Still uneasy, still edged with mistrust, but a thread of something else wound between them. An understanding that survival now bound their fates together. The Apache had not chosen this companionship, nor had she. Yet necessity had thrown them into each other's path, and neither could turn away. Uneasy as it was, the bond had begun, and somewhere in the shadows of the forest, unseen, the men who had tied her to the tree were already hunting, the Apaches. Instincts warned him before his ears or eyes caught the signs. The forest had shifted again, its silence different from the night before, heavier as if it held its breath. Even the wind seemed cautious, whispering low through the branches. He crouched beside the stream, scanning the soft earth tracks. Fresh ones. The boot prints were deep, careless, and many. At least 4 men, moving in a line, their trail cutting across the stream not long before dawn. They were close. Too close. He returned to where Elena rested, her back against a stone. Her eyes closed as she drew strength from the water and fire's warmth. She opened them when she felt his shadow fall over her. "They are coming," he said simply. Her face hardened, but not with surprise. "I told you. They will not stop until they have me." The Apache studied her, the way her jaw clenched, the flicker of fear behind her steel. Whoever those men were, they had bound her to that tree not out of mercy but cruelty. And now they hunted her like prey. "We move," he said. She tried to stand, pushing herself up with trembling legs. Her determination was fierce, but her body betrayed her, stumbling almost immediately. He caught her before she fell, steadying her against his chest. Her eyes flashed. "I can walk." "You cannot run," he countered, his voice low but firm. "And running is what we must do." For a heartbeat, defiance blazed between them. Then her shoulders slumped. She gave a curt nod. He lifted her without another word, cradling her against him as he moved into the trees. His steps were swift but silent, weaving a path known only to a hunter. He did not follow trails. He erased them, stepping on rocks, weaving through streams, circling back to confuse pursuit. But the men were skilled trackers, or at least determined ones. As the day wore on, he heard them faintly behind shouts carried on the wind, the snapping of branches, the bark of a crude laugh. They were not close enough to see, but close enough that their presence burned in his blood at dusk. He set Elena down in a thicket, her body sagging with exhaustion. Sweat clung to her brow, but her eyes were clear. "They know these woods," she whispered. He gave a short nod. "But they do not know me." The fire in his gaze was quiet, dangerous. For 8 years he had avoided men, avoided fights that were not his own. But now, as the shadows deepened and the voices of the hunters grew nearer, something long dormant stirred within him. He felt the old pulse of battle, the sharpened edge of a warrior who had once led men into raids, who had spilled blood without hesitation. He crouched beside her. "You must stay silent, hidden, no matter what you hear." Her hand caught his wrist before he could rise. Her grip was weak, but her eyes held him fiercely. "They are not ordinary men," she said. "They have no honor. If they take you, they will not take me." His words were not a boast, but a promise carved from stone. For a moment, she stared at him as though searching for cracks in his resolve. Then she released him. The Apache melted into the forest shadows, bow in hand, knife at his belt. He moved as he had in his youth, silent, unseen, every breath attuned to the rhythm of the wild. The hunters' voices grew louder, their torches flickering through the trees. 4 men, just as he had counted, their laughter cruel, their confidence unshaken. They believed themselves predators, but predators could bleed. From his perch among the rocks, the Apache watched them pass below, his muscles coiled, his heart steady, his mind sharp. For years he had lived as a ghost, running from his haunted past. Now, with Elena's life bound to his own, he was something more again. He was a warrior. The shadows of pursuit had caught up with him, and soon those shadows would run red. The hunters came at dusk, their torches throwing jagged light against the trees, their laughter slicing through the forest like blades. The Apache crouched above them on a ridge, his bow drawn, his body as still as stone. 4 men, 2 carried rifles slung over their shoulders, another held a whip coiled at his side, and the last, the largest, walked with the swagger of command. Their boots trampled the earth without care, their voices loud, as if the forest itself were their possession. "She can't have gone far," one jeered. "Left her tied like a goat. She won't last 2 nights without us." Laughter followed, cruel and sharp. The Apache's jaw tightened. He had no desire to listen further. He loosed his first arrow. It struck the man with the whip in the throat, silencing his laugh in a gurgle of blood. The others shouted in shock, whirling with rifles raised, their torches flaring. The Apache was already gone from the ridge, sliding into the undergrowth like a shadow with teeth. The crack of a rifle split the air, bark exploding from the tree beside him. Another shot rang out, blind and panicked, wasting powder. He moved swiftly, circling behind them, his knife already in hand. The second man fell with a blade across his spine, collapsing before he could even scream. The remaining 2 cursed, their confidence dissolving into fear. They had come to hunt a wounded girl, not battle a ghost of the wilderness. But the leader was no coward. His voice rang out, steady, harsh. "Spread out, he's 1 man. He bleeds like any other." The Apache's lips curled in the faintest hint of a snarl. 1 man, yes, but a man who had spent 8 years surviving by tooth and claw. A man who carried his dead brother's memory in his heart and the fire of exile in his veins. The fight dragged into the trees, a deadly dance of silence and gunfire. Another shot grazed his shoulder, tearing flesh. Pain flared hot, but he ignored it, moving closer, closer, until he could smell the sweat of his enemy. He struck from the dark, dragging the 3rd man down, steel flashing, silence swallowing his cry. The leader whirled, torchlight catching the Apache's eyes. For the first time, their gazes met, not prey and hunter, but equals. "You," the man growled, recognition sparking. "I've heard of you. The ghost Apache, the exile." The words struck like stones. The Apache stiffened, but his grip did not falter. He lunged. The leader met him head on, knife against knife, strength against strength. Their struggle was brutal, raw, neither giving quarter. The forest rang with the clash of steel, the grunt of effort, the crack of branches as they rolled across the ground. Elena, hidden in the thicket, heard it all. Her heart pounded as she clutched the rock he had given her. Only if they find you, he had said. She wanted to believe in his strength, in his promise, but fear coiled around her throat like a snake. She knew these men, knew the cruelty they carried. If he fell, there would be no mercy for either of them. The fight reached its peak when the leader forced the Apache to the ground, his knife pressing close to his throat. 8 years in the wild, he hissed, and you'll die in the dirt. Like a dog. But exile had not weakened the Apache. It had forged him. With a roar, he twisted, driving his shoulder into the man's chest, sending him sprawling. The Apache's knife struck true, and the leader's cry died into silence. Breathing hard, blood dripping from his shoulder, the Apache rose. Around him lay the 4 hunters, torches flickering beside their fallen bodies. The forest was quiet. Again, as though the trees themselves acknowledged the balance restored. He turned toward the thicket where Elena hid. She emerged slowly, her eyes wide, not with fear but with awe. For a long moment, neither spoke. Finally, she whispered, "You could have left me, and none of this would have followed you." The Apache met her gaze, his face carved with exhaustion. "And fire. If I had left you, I would still be running from myself." Something passed between them then, trust, fragile but undeniable. It was not yet love, not yet even tenderness, but it was a bond forged in blood and survival. For 8 years, the Apache had carried only ghosts. Now, for the first time, he carried something else. Hope. The forest was still. The hunters lay silent. In the undergrowth, their torches burned out, smoke curling faintly into the night sky. The Apache stood among them, his knife slick with blood, his breath steady though his body ached with wounds. The battle was over, but he did not yet feel victory. Victory was a word for men who celebrated, who feasted and laughed with their brothers. For him, there was only survival. Behind him, Elena moved cautiously from her hiding place. She stepped past the fallen with narrowed eyes, her bare feet silent on the earth. She stopped a few paces from him, watching, weighing him as though he were still a stranger despite all they had endured together. "You saved me," she said softly. "Not as thanks, but as truth." The Apache sheathed his knife. "You saved yourself. I was only the hand fate chose." She tilted her head, studying him. "And yet, without that hand, I would be ash among the trees." Her words stirred something in him he had long buried. For 8 years he had carried only silence, ghosts, and guilt. Now, for the first time, he felt the weight of another's. Life bound to his own. It frightened him more than any rifle dot as dawn crept into the forest. The sky turned pale gold above the trees. He led her away from the battlefield, guiding her with steady steps until they found a clearing where the sun touched the earth. They paused there, the light spilling over them like a blessing. Elena sank to her knees, exhaustion finally claiming her. Her hair glowed in the sunrise, tangled but radiant, and when she looked up at him, her eyes held something gentler than defiance. "Why have you lived alone all these years?" she asked quietly. The Apache hesitated. The question was simple, but the answer was carved from sorrow. "I lost my people," he said at last. "My brother, my place. Exile was the only path left." "And so you chose silence," she said. He nodded once. Elena's gaze softened, but her voice remained strong. "You are not silence. You are a man, and men are not meant to carry the world alone." The words struck deep, sharper than any blade. He had told himself for years that solitude was strength, that loneliness was his punishment. But here was this woman stripped of her strength, yet unbroken, telling him that survival was not the same as living. He looked at her then, truly looked, and for the first time in 8 years he did not see a ghost of the past or a shadow of his guilt. He saw possibility. They rested as the sun climbed higher, and for a rare moment peace settled over him. No shouts of enemies, no whispers of blame, no ghosts pressing against his chest. Only the quiet breath of a woman who had chosen to live, and the faint hope that perhaps he could choose the same. But he knew the path ahead would not be simple. The men who had hunted her would not be the last. Whoever they served, whatever purpose had bound her to that tree, still lingered like a storm beyond the horizon. He could walk away now, return to his silence, and let her fate run its course. That would be the safe choice, the solitary choice. Yet as he stood there, the thought of leaving her felt heavier than the years of exile he had carried. Solitude had protected him, but it had also hollowed him. Saving her had awakened something he thought long dead, the will to fight not only for survival, but for someone else. He crouched beside her, his shadow stretching long in the morning sun. "You are not safe," he said quietly, "but if you will walk beside me, I will see you through." Her eyes met his, fierce despite her exhaustion. Then we walked together. A silence settled between them, no longer the silence of exile, but of understanding. A fragile bond had been forged in blood, fire, and dawn's first light. It was not yet love, not yet belonging, but it was something. Something new. The Apache rose, extending his hand. She took it, and together they stepped from the clearing into the wild unknown. For the first time in 8 years, he was not walking alone.